Daryl, Hunter of Walkers. For 2 in Gruul, you get a 4/4 legendary creature, Human Archer. At the beginning of your upkeep, target opponent creates 3 Walker tokens. Tap, deal 2 damage to target creature. Whenever a zombie an opponent controls dies, draw a card. Again, this is one of my weird commanders because I'm also not a big fan of Gruul, but because this commander draws an obscene amount of cards, and I treat it as a sort of Gruul control deck, this really hits home and does some value. Now, giving your opponent 3 walkers, i.e. 2/2 tokens, may sound like a downside, but as long as you're political with them, you can use them to your advantage. If an opponent decides to attack you with them, you'll realistically only take about 2 damage, because you can block with Daryl, and then tap before damage, kill another zombie, and then 2 cards for 2 life is pretty standard rate, and you have that backup card in case they want to come for you. The way I built this deck was I filled it with lots of instant speed, deal 2 damage to all creature effects, so that you can keep giving people zombies. If they ever decide to betray your trust or you need to draw a lot of cards, you can play those instant speed sweepers and draw a bagillion cards. There's lots of politics involved with this as well, because if they block one of your 2/2s that you gave to someone else with a 4/4, you can then tap Daryl to finish off the creature, effectively making them not want to block the zombies and dealing damage to your opponents with an opponent's effect. Goading them is also a fantastic way to ensure that the damage is going to come through and make sure that you draw oodles and cadoodles of cards. This is also one of the only decks that you can guaranteed for value run Reap and Pygmy Kabu, because your opponent will always have black creatures because you're giving them black creatures. Aragorn, King of Gondor, is 1 in Jeskai for a 4/4 legendary creature, Human Noble. Vigilance and lifelink. When Aragorn enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. When Aragorn attacks, target creature can't block this turn. And if you are the monarch, instead, no creatures can block this turn. There's tons of ways to build this guy, but the way I built it was I filled it with every single creature that I could think of that had a conditional card draw effect. Things like Esper Sentinel, Mangara, Archivist of Ogma, doesn't really matter. As long as you have a series of creatures that will draw you new cards, get you new answers, new protection spells, counter spells, one-sided board wipes, whatever you need. Being able to swing in for free with all your creatures every turn is very helpful, especially when a lot of these cards that will just generally draw you cards on their own, like Fairy Mastermind and Aerial Extortionist, already have evasion to take back the monarchy should you need it. In addition, this deck is functioning with a lot of pillow fort cards to make sure that our opponents cannot attack us and take our monarchy away, guaranteeing our card draw and our point swing as we so wish.
But this is true, right? Well, how and why do you eat
So much. So many crumbs too on your linen suit.
How do you
Next up, we have Chris Pine, Egan Larcenous Lutenist. For 1 in Izzet, you get a 3/3 legendary creature, Human Bard. Each non-land card in your hand without Fertel has Fertel. Its Fertel cost is equal to its mana cost, reduced by 2. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, target creature, goad target creature, and opponent controls. Another sort of general fun card, you can fill this deck with copious amounts of 2 colorless or less mana rocks, and being able to foretell them all and then play them all, which will trigger his second effect at will, and being able to constantly play a bunch of spells. Now, this is a weird one because you do want to run counter spells, but you don't want to run the normal counter spells. Default counterspell is actually a detriment here because you want to foretell your entire hand, and default counterspell for 4 mana is pretty bad. But things like Dismiss will fulfill that arc for you and draw you a card, as well as running all sorts of other weird counterspells that have 2 colorless mana in their cost, such as Exclude. These are unique counterspells you'll basically never run anywhere else, and having the added effect of drawing a card is always nice. Now what we want to do with this deck is we want to play a fairly high amount of mana rocks, foretell our entire hand, and then wheel, windfall, whatever you want to do to reset your hand because you had no cards in hand, but also keeping all of your advantage in your foretell pile on the side. This is effectively netting free cards, and whenever you do need them, they cost 2 less. It's kind of a slower deck, but it's very fun. Also, using Passionate Archaeologist is a fantastic way to burn people out, as well as Crackle with Doom and other, Izzety Bird stuff. Our last partner pairing is Abdol Adrian Gorian's Ward. For 4 and a white, you get a 4/4 legendary creature, Human Warrior. When Abdol enters the battlefield, exile any number of other non-land permanents you control until Abdol leaves the battlefield. Then create a 1/1 white soldier for each permanent exiled this way. Choose a background. Our background is Far Traveler. For 2 and a white, commander creatures you own have, at the beginning of your end step, exile up to 1 target tapped creature you control. Then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. So you can probably get the gist here. We want to play a bunch of cool ETBs, things like ETB draw a card, ETB exile an artifact or enchantment, whatever you really want. And then Abdol will eat them all. And then as long as he's tapped, which is why we run some vehicles in here that have utility effects, then we can tap him without even having to swing with him, and blink him in, which is effectively blinking our entire board every single turn and netting dudes in the process, which is extremely strong. Now it's important to note that Abdol has this weird little niche where if he makes, let's say, 5 soldiers, he can then eat those same soldiers to replace the soldiers with new soldiers. What effect does this have, you ask? Well, for 1, it untaps them, effectively, and for 2, that's a lot of ETBs you're getting. So if you use Soul Sisters, you're going to gain an abhorrent amount of life, and just, gain I'm talking hundreds of life off a single Soul Sister, as long as your deck is properly blinking with other effects. Like I said, you can just pretty much run any good ETB mono white blink card you wish. There's been a lot of support ever since I started building this deck that I wish I had when I first started making this deck. But things like, Gandalf and Elish Norn 2, or the one that is a Panamanicon, things like that will really make this deck pop off. And honestly, it's just a super fun deck, so much so that my playgroup typically doesn't like me playing it, but it is very strong and very fun. So, The last card on our list is a Yara, Widow of the Realm. For 1 black, you get a 3/3 legendary creature, Elf Noble. Tap, sacrifice another creature or artifact. Yara, Widow of the Realm, deals X damage to target opponent or battle, and you gain X life, where X is the sacrificed permanent's mana value. Tap 5 and a Phyrexian red, transform a Yara, activate only as a sorcery. I'm not going to get into what the backside says, because we do not care. There will almost never be a time where we'll ever want to flip her. Now, what makes us different from any other fling commander, you ask? Well, she flings based on mana value, which is something no other fling card has ever been able to do. So we run things that reanimate, like Draco is our #1 fling boy for 16 whopping life. To deal 16 and heal 16 is incredibly strong. In addition, we have the Mortality card from Capenna, this guy, who is 15 mana, who can accomplish the same thing. -1, it's still 15. These are phenomenal ways to knock out our opponents. Other than that, is a traditional, mill and reanimated style deck with a little bit of a twist. The twist is that we run ways to copy creatures, so we do not have to sacrifice our original creatures. Tokens created of a copy of a creature will retain their mana value. This means that we can create a copy of Mortality and fling it at someone for 15 and still keep our original so that we can continue to copy it and continue to fling it. That way we don't have to constantly reanimate it over and over and over again. So there you have it. Those are some of my personal cool commanders that I have built that are extremely fun, and I would recommend checking them out. If you guys would like a more in-depth guide on any of these commanders, please let me know down in the comments. And you, have a fantastic day.